I grew up in a small town in Ohio. Every morning, I had to take the bus to school. Our house was at the bottom of a hill on a quiet country road. Strangely, my bus stop was at the top of that hill, so every day, I had to walk up there after passing my house. This happened when I was about 7 or 8 years old. Like any other morning, I woke up, got ready for school, and waited for the bus. It usually came around 7 a.m. just as the sun was starting to rise. The woods near my house were still a bit dark, and I was the only one waiting at my bus stop. I was the only kid at the bus stop, so my mom or dad had to drop me off a bit early, before the bus came. They had to rush to get to work by 8 o'clock. Even though it wasn't perfect, we thought our neighborhood was safe. The bus usually arrived on time, so my parents weren't too worried about me being alone for those 5 minutes. I was standing in the cold morning, waiting for the bus. The sun was slowly rising, but it wasn't very bright yet. I could see the bus's lights in the distance, right on time. It pulled up, and Mrs. Teresa, my bus driver, greeted me and told me to get on. I went to my seat on the bus and put my stuff down. But then I saw something weird. The bus wasn't moving. Mrs. Teresa, the bus driver, was still sitting with the door open. She was leaning out a bit and looking into the woods for what felt like a really long time. Finally, we started moving again and picked up more kids before getting to school. Normally, Mrs. Teresa just dropped us off, but this time she walked us inside, which she never did before. I saw her go into the office and talk to one of the secretaries. The rest of my day at school was normal. My dad picked me up in the car line, and he asked me strange questions about the bus and if any cars honked at me. The next day, my parents didn't take me to the bus stop. Instead, my mom drove me to school later than usual. This continued throughout the school year, with either my mom or dad dropping me off. I also noticed that they changed my bus stop. Many years later, I found out why all these changes happened. On that morning when Mrs. Teresa looked into the woods, she saw a man standing there. She quickly told the school secretary, who then contacted the transportation office and the police. An investigation revealed some creepy things wrapped up in a t-shirt, hidden in the woods, a hunting knife, rope, a rag, or washcloth, and tape. The police couldn't figure out who owned those things. But everyone, including Mrs. Teresa, my parents, and the police, believed that the person who left them there had bad intentions. It scares me to think about what could have happened if Mrs. Teresa had been a little late or hadn't seen the man in the woods. After that scary event, the school district decided to change my bus stop. Now, the bus picked me up right in front of my house. I didn't have to stand near the woods anymore. I happily went back to taking the bus the next school year, feeling safer because the bus stopped right at my doorstep. As the years went by, I couldn't forget about that weird morning. Then one day, when I was a teenager, I found an old photo album in the attic. As I flipped through the pictures, I saw one of my parents with Mrs. Teresa at a community event. But what caught my eye was a man in the background. Even though he was kind of hidden in the crowd, something about him seemed familiar. His outline and the way he stood reminded me of something from a long time ago. Suddenly, it hit me. He was the same guy Mrs. Teresa saw in the woods that morning, years back. My heart raced as I realized the connection. I had a lot of questions in my head. Like, why was he at a community event? Did he have anything to do with our town? His presence in that picture made things even more confusing for me. It felt like my accidental discovery was a surprise in the story, a new part of an old mystery. Because I was curious, I decided to tell my parents about what I found. When I showed them the photo and pointed out the man, their faces changed from curiosity to worry. They looked at each other, and my dad slowly started to explain. It turns out the man was a distant relative who had visited our town a few times. But over the years, they lost touch with him. Finding out about this made me feel a bit confused. I learned that the man in the woods was actually a family member who had some unknown reasons for being there. It was weird because it added a surprising family link to a story that felt like a scary dream from far away. Talking about this mysterious relative became something we avoided in our family. My parents didn't want to dwell on it and tried to make it seem less important. They told me not to worry, but even though they said that, the strange feeling didn't go away. The memory of that morning became even more complicated. As I learned more about our family's past, I found out more about a mysterious relative. He used to visit us sometimes, but my parents kept it a secret. When I asked them, they didn't want to share much. The more I asked, the more I realized that the man in the woods wasn't just a stranger with bad intentions. He was actually related to us. Curious and a bit nervous, I decided to talk to Mrs. Teresa. She might know more about him. It took some effort, but I finally found her in a nearby town. As we talked, her face showed more lines as she remembered that important morning. She told me that the man in the woods wasn't a stranger at all. Surprisingly, he was a relative who sometimes came to our town. Mrs. Teresa looked worried as she explained that people were worried about him because he was acting strangely. That morning, when he was near the bus stop, it set off a chain of events that led to the discovery of strange things in the woods. So, the surprising part of the story wasn't a bad stranger, but a distant family member. His strange behavior made people concerned for my safety. Mrs. Teresa's revelation made me feel confused. Instead of being scared of a stranger, now I was caught up in a complicated mix of family secrets and unsettling truths. As time passed, that morning stayed in my mind and changed how I felt about being safe and trusting others. Something surprising happened that turned a random event into a family mystery. It made the places from my childhood seem different, like there was a mystery around them. The person in the woods wasn't a stranger anymore. They were a family member. Their presence felt strange and made that scary morning a part of our family story forever. On July 15, 1988, in Pinedale, Oregon, something important happened that the people in the town wanted to forget. It was a warm summer day, with the sun making long shadows. 26 kids from Pineville Junior High School were happily laughing. They were with Sam Brown, a friendly farmer in his early 50s, who was also their beloved school bus driver. Sam, a strong and calm man, was driving kids home from a fun day at Pineville Amusement Park. The bus was noisy with kids talking and laughing after the exciting day. Even though the bus was loud, the kids loved Sam because he was patient and dependable. But then, as the bus turned onto Oak Street, they ran into a problem. A white Chevy van was blocking the road, and its door was wide open. Sam tried to go around it, but there was a surprising and strange thing. A man in overalls, his face covered with pantyhose, showed up with a revolver. He didn't sound angry, just calmly asked,
"Could you open the door, please?"
Sam was unsure, but in the end, he opened the door like the man asked. 2 more guys, wearing the same clothes, came onto the bus. One had a rifle, and the other didn't have any weapon. The guy without the weapon sat in the driver's seat, and the one with the gun got into the van behind the bus. They drove the bus for about a mile and then parked it secretly in some bushes near Pineville River. During the whole ride, it was really quiet and creepy, making everyone on the bus even more scared. The kids and Sam were guided into another van that was waiting there. This van was white but painted green. There was a barrier between the front seats and the back, and the windows were closed tightly. For a really long time, Sam and the kids were stuck in the back of those vans. It was dark outside, and it was super hot because it was summer in Oregon. Everyone was scared because they didn't know what was going to happen next. Some of the older kids tried to make things less scary by singing songs like "If You're Happy and You Know It." Meanwhile, in Pineville, parents started to worry after just 15 minutes when the bus didn't show up. Sam was never late, so they knew something was wrong. Within an hour, everyone in town was talking about the missing bus, and the news on TV and radio kept giving updates. Parents helped the police figure out where the bus usually went, and they found it abandoned later that evening. As the scary situation happened, 30 FBI agents came to the place and started a big investigation to find the missing kids and Sam. It was late at night when vans arrived at a quiet rock quarry, 100 miles away in Springfield. The people who took the kids had a strange plan. Ed was the first person to get out of the van. He was given a flashlight and told to take off his clothes. Then he was asked to go down a ladder into a hole in the ground. Above the ground, the names of the children were called out one by one as they got off the bus. After that, they also had to take off their clothes and go down the ladder into what they called the hull, an old moving van, buried 12 feet underground. Some mean people caught them and said they would come back. They closed the door with a heavy metal cover, and the people inside asked to be let go. The captors dropped dirt on top of the van, burying them alive. Inside the van, everyone got really scared when they understood what was going on. Ed and Michael, who was 14 years old, tried hard to push open the cover, but it didn't work. After a lot of trying, they finally got it open with a piece of wood and moved some stuff out of the way. Then, they dug through the dirt, blocking the door, and escaped. After being stuck for 16 hours, they walked to the guard shack at the quarry. A security guard there called the police. Ed and the kids were then taken to a nearby jail, where they got food and talked to the police. But here's the surprising part. The people who kept them. Frederick Newell Woods, James Schoenfeld, and Richard, who is James' brother, were having a really hard time with money. At first, they planned to take over the bus and ask for $5 million to let everyone go. But when they saw the group escape, they got scared and ran away from the scene. Something surprising happens during the investigation in Pineville. There's a mysterious person in town who finds out about a really bad plan. This person secretly tells the FBI about it without anyone knowing who they are. The informant knows a lot about the three people behind the plan and helps the FBI find them. As the investigation goes on, it turns out that this informant knows a lot about the bad guys' lives. They share hidden reasons and complicated relationships. But nobody knows who this secret informant is, and it surprises and shocks the people in Pineville. 3 guys were caught after a 2-week chase. Now they're in trouble for kidnapping and some tricky money crimes. A secret tipster spilled the beans, making the trial super exciting for everyone in the country. Even though the bad guys tried to get away, they're not just in trouble for kidnapping kids. They're also on the hook for shady money stuff that made them do the kidnapping. A surprising turn in the story makes it even more interesting, proving that sometimes, when things are really bad, unexpected heroes show up to make things right. People in Chowchilla and around the world were really upset when these men, who did a terrible thing, were let go. If Michael and Ed hadn't been brave enough to rescue the group from the van, they might not have made it. Ed Ray, unfortunately, passed away on May 17, 2012. But people still remember him as a hero, especially those who went through that scary day in Pineville. Back in February 1991, on a cold morning, I, a 15-year-old girl named Lily from Belgium, was waiting for the school bus in Vlaams-Brabant, my home province. I lived with my parents, Mary and John, and my little brother, Jake, in a quiet neighborhood called Leaf. Every day, Mom would drive me to the bus stop and then take Jake to kindergarten. This morning was just like any other. As I got out of the back seat of our car, I waved bye to Mom and little Jake. Mom looked at me proudly in the rearview mirror. She always thought I was sensible and independent, suggesting I'd do well in the future. Little did she know it was the last time she'd see me alive. Instead of waiting for the bus, I decided to take a walk towards a nearby forest called the Boki. When I got to the edge of the trees, I saw a man I didn't know. It was weird, but I wasn't scared, so I followed him into the forest. Later that morning, around 10 a.m., my parents got a call at work saying I never showed up at school. My dad rushed home to look for me, and soon the whole family, along with friends and neighbors, were searching the town. We even reported me missing to the police. As days passed, we still had no idea where I was, and the situation got even more confusing. Almost a year later, a group called Child Focus got interested in my situation. They said they thought they found a person who might have done it, named Christian Van Geven. He had been in trouble before for taking kids and hurting them. The French police were really sure they caught the right person, but there was no proof. So, they started looking at other people. One guy they looked into was Mark Drew. He did bad things to young girls in Belgium, but he didn't start until 4 years after I disappeared in 1995. There was another guy, Michael Stocks, a truck driver from Belgium, who was in jail in Holland for hurting a child in 1991. He also became a suspect in my case. Stock's old cellmate said that, in a talk, Stocks confessed to taking a child from a bus stop in the early 90s. He explained how he tricked the girl by pretending to be a friend of her parents, saying his car had broken down, and that's how he managed to kidnap her. At first, the story sounded unbelievable, but as more information came out, the police arrested Stocks, suspecting him of kidnapping. Stocks strongly denied the accusations, saying he had proof he was in France when I went missing. However, when they checked his truck's tachograph, a device that records a driver's journey, they found signs of tampering. Stocks had fake paperwork about where he was supposed to be going. Even though this evidence didn't show he was in Belgium on that specific day, it suggested that he had planned and manipulated things ahead of time. In the spring of 1993, investigators found important evidence that showed someone did something very wrong. They looked at Stock's driving records and saw signs that he had messed with them and made stops that couldn't be explained. Because of this, he was arrested again, this time on suspicion of kidnapping and killing someone. When they questioned him a lot, Stocks finally admitted that he had killed a young girl in 1991 named Jessica, not Natalie. He also confessed to killing 2 boys from Germany. The police in the Netherlands thought I might be one of Stocks' victims, but he said it wasn't true, claiming he only started killing in July 1991, not February. Even though people had doubts, Stocks was still sent to prison for 20 years. After being in prison for 8 years, in September 2001, Stocks had a really sad accident. He got hurt using turpentine and fluorescent lights, and it caused him to accidentally set himself on fire. Sadly, he died later that month. Some people thought it was fair punishment, while others believed it might have been on purpose. But here's the surprising part. As time passed, new evidence showed up. An old journal from a retired detective who worked on the case was found. In the journal, the detective William Thompson wrote about another person who could be a suspect. Nobody had thought about this person before, and the detective had retired before the case went in a different direction. Thompson was checking out a guy named David Foster, who lived close to the Boki Woods and had a history of being violent. Thompson found some clues but couldn't follow up before he retired. Later on, new detectives got interested in Foster again. They went back to the old clues and saw that Foster's excuse for where he was when I went missing wasn't very believable. So, they started asking Foster and the people around him more questions. When they looked into Foster's past, they found out he had a history of being violent, and some people remembered seeing him near the Boki Woods on the day I disappeared. With more and more pressure, Foster finally admitted to kidnapping me. Foster admitted he'd been spying on me for weeks, learning about my daily habit. One morning, he messed with the gray Toyota on purpose to trick me. When I came closer, he acted like he needed help, and I got into the car without suspecting anything. His plan worked perfectly. Foster took me to a hidden cabin in the deep Boki Woods. He avoided suspicion by acting like a regular person in the community. It turns out the real villain wasn't the truck driver, Stocks, but the seemingly normal neighbor, Foster. In a trial at the court, they found Foster guilty of kidnapping, breaking the rules, and killing someone. He got a life sentence in prison, which gave my family a sense of ending to the whole thing. This shocking news not only surprised our neighborhood, but also made people wonder if the investigations in the past were reliable. My brother, in an interview in 2011, talked about feeling both relieved and sad. The terrible event had forever changed our close family. While it was good to have some closure, the many years of not knowing the answers felt like a never-ending problem. Even after everything, my dad kept going to the bus stop, not because he was still looking for me, but to honor my memory and remind everyone that real monsters might look just like regular people.